Come on up. Come on down. um, he is our key leader in the tribe we're connected with in the body of Christ. And he's just going to share with us a gifted man of God. So, Tim.
Thanks, brother. Hey, would you guys just share some appreciation for your great pastor and his team today? One of my mentors used to say that longevity is the great convincer, and I'm always thankful when there are pastors who give their time and give years to a place and people to invest and watch the discipleship grow. And so I'm so thankful for Pastor Steve as he's a part of our team, part of the district board as well. The first thing I'd love to do is just introduce myself to those of you who I haven't met yet, and then share a little bit about what's happening across our network of churches, and then we'll jump into the word today. So, like I said, my name is Tim. I serve as it's a weird title. We call it district superintendent, which means I work to help the churches, our Wesleyan churches across Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi do whatever God's asking them to do. And that's my job, is to resource, support, and help churches do what God's asking them to do. And so it's been a privilege to do that for the last 3 years. We are on our way down to this afternoon to Exponential, a church planting conference, actually the largest church planting conference in the world. I'll be working with some folks to do a pre-conference and then getting to network and recruit church planters. And so my wife, Anita, who doesn't often get to travel with me, is with me today. And if you get the opportunity to meet her, you will realize that she is the better of the two of us and what makes the two of us great together. And so I'm so glad that you're with me today. I love you. Thank you. Yeah. She holds things down at home when I have to be on the road with our two teenagers. We have a 16-year-old who will be 17 this month, a junior in high school, and then a 14-year-old daughter, a freshman in high school. And so if you don't pray for me for the work I do, pray for me for the children I have. They are great kids, though. We're so blessed. Our son is he's a driven leader, loves to get involved, serves in the student council for the city, serves with in DECA and in student leadership for the county and his school, and is actually headed to Poland at the beginning of the summer on a mission trip to help Ukrainian refugees as they're transitioning from Ukraine to Germany. And so he's really excited about that, and we're excited and a little nervous for him as he heads out of the country for the first time. And then our daughter is finding herself as a freshman. She is a little different. She is super bright, but refuses to enter into stress and pressure. So she will work really hard up to the point that most teenagers and high schoolers start to feel the pressure to perform, and that's her limit. She is one of the most self-aware 14-year-olds I've met. She understands her energy as far as she's more introverted. So if she's with people all day, she's like, I need to go be by myself for an hour or two, and then I'll come be with you. I'm like, that's fine, because if you stay down here, you're going to make us all miserable. So get that. So she's gotten into theater and will be inducted into the Thespian Society and into advanced theater over the next couple of weeks, is a part of the cast for SpongeBob the Musical. I didn't know this was a thing. Apparently it's a very popular thing. And so she has all kinds of rehearsals and dance for that. And they're both people of faith and love God and love the church and have been a part of doing ministry with us as long as they've been alive, really. And so we're grateful to be able to serve. It means we serve a little differently. I don't get on the road as much as I would if we didn't have kids at home. And so I'm not involved on Sunday mornings in churches as often, but I'm connected to the pastors throughout the week, serving in various huddles and coaching cohorts and working to support churches behind the scenes more so than just showing up on a Sunday. So we just shifted the focus a little bit, and we're excited about what's happening on this district. We are seeing at least a third of our churches have grown by more than 50% since COVID. We have, in the last 3 years, approved and are sending out 7 different church plants across this region in 3 years. Since I was here last, we started a church in Gray, Georgia. You probably don't know where Gray, Georgia is. There's only 3,000 people there. It's outside of Macon. A young couple who recognized that they had some roots there and a call back there to reach a generation that wasn't being reached by the churches. And since they launched last Easter, in less than a year, they have seen about 40 people saved. They will be doing baptisms today that will put them somewhere around 25 folks who have been baptized, and are running just under 200 people in worship every Sunday in under a year. So we're excited about what God's doing in Gray. Later this month, we together are replanting or restarting a church that was in Magnolia Springs. It just kind of came to the end of its life cycle, but had something left to it. And so it's just this beautiful image of death and resurrection. The gospel, in the gospel, death is never the end of the story. So we've worked with them to be able to say goodbye to what was Magnolia Springs Church, and the well will launch in the Oswa movie theater on Easter this year. And we're excited about what God's already doing as he's bringing a team together, and they'll be launching on Easter. We launch Awaken Atlanta in downtown Atlanta in September of this year. And then the Foundry will launch in Columbus in January of 25. And we're working to get some planters moved into Nowhere, Alabama. Montgomery, Alabama, not Montgomery, sorry. Montgomery's not nowhere. McIntosh, I got the M. McIntosh is, so it's about 45 minutes north of Mobile, a very, very small town. But this couple has a heart for the people there, for the diversity and the needs that are in that impoverished community. And so have a mission minded approach that they're going to be moving into McIntosh this summer, and we're going to be helping them to build their network and get ready to launch a church there in McIntosh, Alabama. So we're excited about what God is doing. We're excited about what he's doing in our existing churches as he is raising up leaders, raising up pastors, as pastors are learning and growing. We just had a time together with over 100 pastors and leaders from not just our district, but the influence is broadening. We had 4 other Wesleyan districts and 3 Nazarene districts represented as we gathered for a pastor training event a couple of weeks ago. And it was a fantastic day of learning and growing and networking among our leaders. And so we just celebrate what God is doing across this district, because we celebrate it because not just what's happening in those individual places, but it's what God is doing among us together. So all of those stories are a part of what God is doing here as he is preparing and laying the groundwork for the next stage here. And you are a part of what's happening in all of those places. In so many ways, even as you give, you're a part of investing in those plants and in those things and new works all across our region. And as they give, they're a part of what's happening here. So we're excited to watch as God multiplies those things and does some great works all across our wonderful region. I happen to believe it's about the best place to live. And I think it's a great place to have family. I think it's a great place to plant. And then we just kind of have all these wonderful communities. If you want the mountains, you got the mountains. If you want the beach, you got the beach. If you want in between cities or rural, it's all there. And so we're just excited to see as God is reaching people and transforming lives all across this territory. So thank you. Thank you for being a part of that. Thank you for investing. Thank you for what you're doing here and we're seeing God do here. So let's pray and then we'll jump in for today. Father, you are good and you are faithful, and we thank you. We celebrate you, and we ask that as we look into your word, as we look into the story of Jesus, that you would help us to begin to see ourselves, to wrestle with the questions and the life of Jesus and what we might learn and how we might grow to become more of who you made us to be so that we can do all that you created us to do. In Jesus' name, amen. So over the journey of faith, I've recognized a strange thing. We celebrate and we invite people into the presence of God. And now we know that even as we say that, God is always with us. We don't have to go somewhere to enter into the presence of God. But there are those places and times where we feel his presence, we become more aware of his presence. But then I think there are these times where God reveals his presence in what feels like absence. Right? It feels like God is not present. Maybe you felt that. You ever felt like maybe you feel a little forgotten? Like God's not seeing what you're going through? He's not with you. You wonder where he is, why the prayers aren't being answered, what's happening in this season. Maybe you feel like God has put some gifts or calling in you, but there's no opportunity to use those. Or it feels like every time you try, it just gets hidden again. You wonder where your place is in it all. It can just feel a bit forsaken, even hidden. Maybe it's just a season or a time or life in general, we just feel kind of obscure and anonymous. Like no one really sees or knows or understands. If you've never felt that way, I can assure you that one day you will. There's this reality to both our spiritual lives and life in general, in which we roll through these seasons. And obscurity and hiddenness and anonymity rise up. Maybe it's when you first come out of high school and you enter into college and you're in this school that's so much larger and you feel like you don't know anybody, you don't know where to go or where to turn. Or maybe it's after college and suddenly you're in the job force, but you're the new one. And nobody knows what you're capable of. Nobody knows what you can do. Nobody knows your strengths, and you feel like you have to prove yourself to get an opportunity. I think it comes again. I'm starting to feel it a little bit as our kids are getting to that age where they move out. And you wonder, what's my role now? What's my purpose now? What am I supposed to be doing now? And then maybe at retirement age is another time we naturally feel that. Like we're being set aside. When we hit these seasons of obscurity, of hiddenness, of anonymity, most of us don't like it. In fact, our first instinct is trying to crawl out of it as fast as we can. We start to do whatever we can to be seen, to grab at any opportunity that might come our way, because the thought of being anonymous and forgotten in this life is terrifying. I mean, it's built into us from the very beginning, a need and a desire to be seen and heard. In fact, we find that the teenagers who are most confident and able to express their thoughts are those who were listened to at a very young age, because it instilled a confidence and a value in who they are. And so when we enter into seasons where we don't feel seen and we don't feel heard, and it even feels like maybe God has forgotten us, it can do something in us that causes us to grab at things. Now, here's a truth that I want you to hold on to throughout the message. God made you. He formed you in your mother's womb. He built into you strengths and abilities. And then when you came into him, he gave you, when you came a believer, he gave you gifts of the Spirit. In fact, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 says that he predetermined good works for you to do. The thing is, he has to prepare us to do the good works before we're ready to do the good works. Because all of those strengths, all of those abilities, all of those gifts are put into us in seed form. And where do seeds grow? There we go. That's over. Oh, thanks. in darkness, in the dirt, buried, forgotten, in the unseen, in the hidden. God's desire is for you to do everything He created for you to do. His desire is for you to use the gifts and the strengths and the abilities to step into the spotlight. After all, you are His child. You have no reason to shrink back. In fact, the world does not benefit from you playing small, but stepping into all you were created to be. But He has to prepare you first. And preparation always happens in the hidden places, in anonymous seasons, in the forgotten. And we miss out on becoming who we were meant to be and eventually doing what we were meant to do when we scratch our way out of them, when we pull our way out of them. We can get into situations where our competency takes us, but our character is not ready, and it always leads to a crash. So we have to learn to wrestle with this anonymity, to wrestle with obscurity, to embrace it, embrace the hiddenness. But it's not easy. It's not comfortable. And we can feel like there's more to us than God is using. A couple of things to remember is one, that whenever you climb a mountain, it always starts in the valley. To get to the top of the mountain, to get that view, it always begins in the valley and requires the hard work of the climb. We are in Georgia, so any Georgia football fans? I don't like even talking about this when I'm in Alabama, but and so I actually reference a Clemson coach. But so Georgia's football team is pretty good. Great. They show up every Saturday and are great. But what makes them great is not what's happening on Saturday. You see, long before Saturday, long when we're starting to ache for football season to come back, when it's 100,000 degrees in Georgia in the middle of the summer, they're doing the work. They can't meet with their head coaches. They can't meet with any of the coaching staff. The only people they can work with are your fitness coaches, are your strengths coaches. The strengths coach at Clemson calls this part of the season transformation phase. Transformation phase. The success of Saturday begins in the summer when nobody's watching, when no fans are showing up, when the coaches aren't even there, in the hidden. And that determines how they perform when the spotlight comes on. But we miss that. Maybe more than anyone else in the history of our world, and certainly throughout Scripture, Jesus seemed to get this. I mean, often as Christians, we're taught to think things like, I want to be like Jesus. But when we say, I want to be like Jesus, what we mean is things like flipping tables and rebuking people. We want to teach like Jesus. We want to see Jesus' type of miracles. We want to see the things we read about in the bulk of the Gospels of 3 years of his life. We don't mean, hide me for 30 years like you did Jesus. Think about it. We read in the beginning of Matthew that he's born, and we don't hear about him again for 8 days. He's in the temple, he's blessed, and then he disappears again for 12 years, shows up for a few days, and he recognizes who he is as the Father's Son, and he disappears again for 18 more years. And we don't know anything about those seasons. If I imagine those seasons, though, think how frustrating that must have been. To know your purpose, to know your call, to know the strength pulsing through your veins, and the Father to leave you hidden in a forgotten town in nowhere. So let's look at Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4 is this hinge point moment, right? So he's working there in his, or let's just go, Matthew chapter 4. Starts with this word, then. Then. Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit. What's then? What came before it? Well, nothing. 30 years of I don't know. Just before was a few moments where he went and was baptized. He was baptized and he heard the Father say, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased." Now, take note that this happened before he did anything. No miracles, no teaching, nothing. And yet the Father was well pleased. It should just remind us that it's not about our performance. The Father's pleasure in us has nothing to do with our performance and everything to do with his love and choice. So then, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days, it's like he even had to wait. He knew he was headed into the desert to be tempted, but then 40 days and 40 nights he has to fast first. So it's like he can't even get on with it. He's got to know it's coming for 40 days. 40 days, 40 nights he fasted, and he became very hungry. He was hungry. Is that the most understated statement in all of Scripture? He went 4 days, 4 hours, and I'm hungry. He's more than hungry. But during that time, the devil came to him. I don't know about you, I get cranky and a little annoying when I'm hungry. I'm probably more easily tempted when I'm hungry. And during that time, the devil came and said to him, "If you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus told him, "No. The Scriptures say people don't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, "If you're the Son of God, jump off. For the Scriptures say, he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone." And Jesus responded, "The Scriptures also say, you must not test the Lord your God." Next, the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. "I will give it all to you," he said, "if you will kneel down and worship me." "Get out of here, Satan," Jesus told him, "for the Scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil went away, and the angels came and took care of Jesus. I want to go back to verse 1 there and just point something out. Now, there we go. It says that he went into the wilderness to be tempted. Now, depending on your version, that also might say tested. He went out into the desert to be tested or tempted. And so what we see is that what's about to happen will reveal what he's already learned. That's what tests do, right? Got any teachers in the room? Those you give a test to see what your students have learned. So this test will reveal the things that Jesus learned in those 30 years. So what I want to do is look at this passage and identify 5 things that I think Jesus learned in his season of anonymity that would be helpful for us to learn in ours. But they're a wrestling. They're not easy things to accept or learn. It's not something you've got it and then you move on. It's something that maybe even takes a lifetime to learn, a re-entering into these seasons. And the first is that that Jesus learned to trust the Father's timing and the Father's use of his gifts. The Father's timing and the Father's use of his gifts. You see, Jesus has 30 years, and at least 18 of those, he knows who he is. He knows his calling. He knows his purpose. He knows what God has put in him. There is all of the ability in him to heal the sick, to raise the dead, to feed the hungry. And I can imagine this teenage Jesus waking up and saying, "Father, is today the day?" "No, today's not the day. Go wash your mom's dishes for her." "Is today the day? I can heal someone today." He says, "No, why don't you go sweep up the shop for Dad?" "Today the day?" "Nope, you just stay over there." Until finally the day came. He says, "Yes, today's the day, but first there's a test." First there's a test. We need to see if you've learned what you needed to learn. Now, here's what I realized. If the Father was willing to hide Jesus in Nazareth, in a shop, with his mom in her home for 30 years, he's certainly willing to hide me and you for a little while. If he was willing to hide the gifts that Jesus had, the strength that Jesus had, the power that Jesus had, he's certainly willing to hide any strengths or gifts that I might have so that they can grow into what he wants them to be. Because strengths and gifts without character and trust in the Father will lead you to destruction. It will lead you to pride. It will lead you to self-celebration. And you'll begin to think that you made something of yourself instead of recognizing that it all begins in the Father. And so sometimes he hides us for our own good. And he's helping us learn to trust in the Father's timing and in his use of our gifts. Because there comes seasons where there are things we feel like maybe we're gifted. And it feels like he set that gift on the shelf. And God, why don't I get to use that? Why don't I get to stand up there? Why don't I get to be in the spotlight? And for whatever reason, he's chosen to have us hidden in that season. And that's his choice. And we can fight against it and try to crawl our way into the spotlight, or we can receive the anonymity as a gift and learn to trust him. Learn to trust in his timing. Trust in what he's trying to do in us. Trust in his use of our gifts. Or his desire to set it on the shelf. There are times I was wrestling with this more than ever. I felt completely unseen in ministry. Felt like nobody recognized what we were capable of, what he was doing in us, and I would get frustrated. God, why? Why? And I thought, God, you're wasting my gifts. The gifts you gave me. And he said, well, isn't that my choice? If I want to waste your gifts? Now, he wasn't wasting them. I thought they were ready for the spotlight, and they weren't. I thought I was ready for the spotlight, and I wasn't. Because when you step into a spotlight, it doesn't shine on you. It shines through you and reveals everything that's in you. And you can end up causing more harm to yourself and others if you're in a spotlight you're not ready for. All we have to do is look at the culture around us to see that. And so we have to learn to trust in the Father's timing and in his use of our gifts. The second thing that I think Jesus learned is that he learned who he was. We have to learn who we are. We have to learn who you are. At the beginning of the temptation, Satan would say to him, if you're the Son of God, prove it. If you're the Son of God, jump off the temple. If you're the Son of God, feed yourself and everyone else in this impoverished country. If you are who you say you are. Now, that's kind of like being a kid and getting the double dog dare. You better step up and prove what you're capable of. If you can do it, do it. It's like this taunt. And clearly this is a real temptation for Jesus, to take into question and try to prove who he says he is. It's a real temptation for us too, isn't it? You step into a new job, somebody questions your authority or your ability. You step onto a stage and you want to prove yourself. You want to show people what you got. And Jesus, because he understood who he was, he had no need to prove himself to Satan or to anyone else. Imagine what it would be like to be so sure of who you were that you could step into any situation with both humility and confidence. To step into every situation ready to learn instead of prove yourself. He understood how God had made him. He understood his purpose. He understood his calling. He understood what it was and what it was not. He understood what he was there to do and what he was not there to do. And he didn't have to take it into his own hands to make it happen. He trusted the Father's timing, and he knew who he was. So I want to speak especially to those who are younger. Maybe in high school, coming out of high school, your 20s especially. I didn't get this lesson until I was in my 30s. And I could only imagine the difference it would have made. But if you can start in your high school years, in your first jobs, and show up to learn instead of show up to prove yourself, it'll change everything. It'll change let's be honest, if you do it in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it'll change everything too. Because what happens in this shift, one, is a humility that recognizes that in our young years, especially when we're new to something, we don't know it all. We don't know it all. We can assume the possibility that we might be wrong about anything and everything. We start there and we show up to learn. We ask good questions. We show up to serve instead of prove ourselves. And here's what happens. Everyone around you wants you to succeed. When you show up to prove yourself instead, everyone likes to watch you fall. And they don't want to help you because you already know it all. You got this. Stop gotten this. Start asking. Start learning. Start serving. Start helping other people win, and they'll want to help you win. And you'll end up much further along, much stronger, much more capable, much more gifted, and with more opportunities than you can imagine because you trusted the Father's timing, you understood who you were, didn't have anything to prove, and you were able to serve. And now He's able to use you to do all of those good things He created before time for you to do. But we have to show up differently. Jesus knew, think about it. He showed up in the temple, and what does it say He did? At 12 years old, He was asking questions. He knew it all, and He was still asking questions. Jesus' life, this will mess with you. He asked over 300 questions. Do you know how many He answered? He directly answered 3. He was asked 183 questions and only directly answered 3 of them. People who have something to prove, speak first. People who have something to prove, feel like they got to answer the question. People who show up to learn, listen. And then get to work and helping others win. Jesus understood who He was and had nothing to prove. Can I tell you, you got nothing to prove. Not to God or anybody else. You were created in His image. He put the gifts in you. He put the strengths in you. He knows you better than you know you. And you got nothing to prove to anybody. You can walk in Him and Him alone. So let's keep going because I know there's another service and I have no idea what time I'm supposed to be done. Number three. Jesus learned to submit His appetites to the will of the Father. He was hungry. Understatement of the year, He was hungry. But not only was He hungry, what we know about Israel in this time is, yes, up on the hill were plenty of rich people, but all along in the cities and the valleys, everywhere He would go, people were hungry. And Jesus had the ability, proven later, to feed them, to turn the stones into bread and feed people. An appetite for hunger, but so many other things. And for us, we're built with appetites. problem is, one theologian put it, is not that our appetites are too strong, it's that our appetites are too weak. And so we satisfy them with inferior things. We have instead a need to raise up, to deepen our appetites for God and the things of God, the things that He made that are good in our relationships, in our finances, in our work, in our marriages, in our parenting, in all of these areas of life. He has given us great things and made them available to us. His desires that we would desire what is good so much that we're willing to look past these weak, inferior things that so many of us get tripped up on. So learning to submit our appetites to the Father involves two things: saying yes to what is good and no to what is not so good. But we often get stuck in this idea of all the things Christians can't do. And so I just choose something better. I give my wife a hard time. So I completely changed my lifestyle about 5 months ago in the way I eat, the way I exercise, the way I spend my time, all kinds of things. And she'll say, "Oh, you can't eat that." I'm like, "No, it's not that I can't eat that. I just choose to eat something different. So I'd rather you not say I can't eat that. Because I can. I just choose this because it's better. And the longer I eat this, the more I realize it's better. Better for me, how much better I feel, how much more strength and energy it gives me than that. And that's true when it comes to lust and love, when it comes to spending versus saving, when it comes to receiving, taking versus giving, in all of these areas of our lives. He's inviting us to want what He wants for us, what He has created that's good for us. And so what Jesus learned to do is He chose to recognize that the words of God are more satisfying even than bread, was that the things of God satisfy. And while we try to satiate our weak appetites with all of these other things, they just bring destruction and weakness and self-loathing. They are destructive. We call them sin in Scripture. Just a word to describe the things that destroy us. The things that God has that are sub to what He would really have for us. The not as good. They just mess us up. He designed us for more. And so Jesus understood, and He learned in submitting to the Father in this season to submit His appetites, the things He wanted or thought He wanted, to the will of the Father and what the Father said would really satiate. So number 4, this one's tough. This one's tough. And number 4, we see Jesus is taken to the top of the temple, and He said to, if you'll jump off of here, the angels will catch you. And what Satan's tempting Him with is the applause of the crowd, the recognition of who He is. You see, if He jumps off the temple into the crowded courts and angels show up and catch Him, everybody's going to know He's the Messiah. Like, everybody's going to cheer. Everybody's going to accept. Everybody's going to realize. But He's doing it according to His plan instead of the Father's, and He's seeking their applause instead of the Father's applause. And what Jesus learned in that season of being hidden, and what we can learn in the season of being hidden, when the only applause we have is that of the Father, that is the only applause we really need. You see, it's easy when you step into a spotlight and you step onto a stage or you start performing in anything at a high level and people are cheering, people are talking about you, people are celebrating you, people are telling you how good you are. It gets real easy to believe your own hype. And it's real dangerous too. And because what happens is we start to like that. And then we start to need that. Then we start to pursue that. And what that means is this: you will give your allegiance to whomever's applause you seek. You give your allegiance to whomever's applause you seek. If you seek the crowd's applause, you're going to do whatever the crowd wants you to. if you seek your boss's applause instead of God's, you'll do whatever they ask you to do, whether it starts to move into questionable territory or not. This one can get dangerous when we as parents seek our children's applause and approval instead of God's. Or parents, kids seeking parents' applause. We can find that we get lost. We lose ourselves in looking for the applause of the crowd. And Jesus understood that the Father's applause was all that he needed. And so it was all that he was going to seek, and he was willing to sacrifice everything for the Father's applause. I mean, he could have very well called angels to take him off of the cross, and everyone would know, and the history books of Rome would have shared that day. But it was not the Father's will. He would have had the crowd's applause, the world's applause, but not the Father's. He was willing. We see it all through his life, even in the garden. God, please don't make me do this. But if it's what you will, if it's your desire, I'll do it. He submitted even his own will and desires to the Father's, to seek the Father's applause. And the last one, number 5. He had trust in the Father's authority. He trusted in the Father's authority. Here's where we can get messed up in so many different ways. It's when we don't understand how authority works. Jesus looks at Pilate, who's saying, you know I have the authority to have you killed. Why aren't you saying anything back to defend yourself? It's like, you don't have any authority except that which the Father has given you. All authority comes from the Father. And any authority or power that you and I have has to be given to us, stewarded by us, and given back. It's not ours. Whether it's authority in the church, authority in the community, authority in the workplace, authority in your home, it is all stewarded. It's not yours. We have to receive it, hold it with open hands, and use it only as the Father would will, and then give it back. It's entrusted to us for a season to be handled with care. Jesus had the ability in that moment to take authority, but you cannot take authority, and that's what Jesus understood and learned as he waited and waited and waited, knowing there would come a day when every knee would bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. Knowing that there would come a day when the Father would submit and make every nation a footstool. Yet he knew he could not take that authority. He could not exercise that authority according to his own will. In fact, over and over again, Jesus says, I only do what the Father has asked me to do. Now I wonder, how are you using the authority that's been entrusted to us? You see, the seasons when we have none and we are stuck under the authority of others, he's teaching us to understand authority and how to wield it when our time comes, how to steward it when our time comes. Because we're all going to be entrusted with it at some level in some way. And it will be for the good of others, or we'll use it for the good of ourselves. Jesus chose to use his authority always for the good of others. And this is just the second little thought on this. It's not fully formed for me, and I'm still wrestling with. But Jesus said he always was doing only what the Father asked him to do. I only do what the Father asked me to do. Only. That's the word I'm wrestling with. Because we get busy doing so many things and say yes to so many things without stopping to ask, is this what God has for me right now? And we can be doing 100 good things. He's only asked us to do 10 or 2. And we wonder why we're so burnt out and so tired and so frustrated and so disappointed, and why nobody else is stepping up to help, and why can't other people get involved. And we get so upset with God and others, and he's like, I didn't even ask you to do that. You're all worked up about something that's somebody else's job anyway. I had someone else in mind. You got in the way. And now you're all worked up about it. Like I said, it's not fully formed, but I wonder sometimes if we were to stop before saying yes, God, what are you asking me to do? Because every yes is a no. Every yes is also a no. Actually, it's probably more like 100 no's. Because once you say yes to one thing, you are essentially saying no to everything else that you could possibly do with that time or that energy or that moment. And God may have had something completely different for you to do with your Saturday than what you're choosing to do. Because you felt obligated, or because it would take you out of the anonymity. It felt like an opportunity that you couldn't pass up. Felt like you had to. He's like, there's no had to. There's no proving yourself. There's no claiming something for yourself. Receive what I'm giving you, even if it means being hidden. At least hidden for one day a week. We call it Sabbath. Stopping, resting, so that we can learn. Sometimes there were Sabbath years and Sabbath seasons, and Jesus spent 90% of his life in anonymity. And we're scared to spend 9 minutes there. And yet it's an invitation. What will you do with this invitation? Your hidden seasons. I'm going to invite Pastor Steve up to close us. It's just this question. What is God asking you to do? Do you have the courage to do it? And look around. There are people who can help, and maybe it's time to ask for help. Pastor?
Let's stand. Let's go. Just have a little bit of soft music here this morning, and if God is saying something to you, this is the time to settle it. I spoke to you about anything. Just head bowed and eyes closed. Listen, we say every Sunday, if somebody wants to come and wants to pray with you, want to do that, you want to settle things with God, we're